The Harley's engine died with a throaty rumble that echoed off the faded cinder block walls of the gas station. Dust hung in the air like a veil, catching the late afternoon sun and turning everything the color of old photographs. Jake, Reaper, Sullivan swung his leg over the seat, his boots crunching on gravel that hadn't been swept in what looked like a decade. The leather of his vest creaked as he stretched, black leather worn soft as butter, adorned with patches that told a story most people couldn't read. Top rocker, Iron Phantom's MC. Bottom rocker, Colorado. And in the center, a skull wreathed in chrome flames. He'd been riding for 6 hours straight, running from nothing and heading nowhere in particular. That's what he told himself, anyway. The gas station looked like it had given up sometime in the 90s. Cracked windows, a flickering neon sign that read Giannis because they had burned out years ago, and a single pump that probably predated credit card readers. But his tank was near empty, and the next town wasn't for another 40 miles through nothing but sagebrush and jackrabbits. That's when he saw her. A girl, maybe 9 or 10 years old, sitting on a concrete step near the station's door. She wore scuffed sneakers with untied laces, denim shorts with frayed edges, and a t-shirt that had once been white but now bore the gray patina of too many washes in hard water. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail that was coming loose, wisps of brown hair framing a face streaked with something that looked like tears, though she wasn't crying now. What caught his attention, though, what made him pause with his hand on the gas pump, was the jacket she held in her lap. A leather riding jacket. Worn, weathered, the kind that had seen 1,000 miles of highway and had the scars to prove it. The leather was creased at the elbows, faded across the shoulders where the sun had beaten down on it year after year. No patches, no club colors, but unmistakably a rider's jacket. Jake had learned a long time ago to mind his own business. Rule number 1 of the road: don't ask questions you don't want answers to. But something about the way she sat there, clutching that jacket like it was the only solid thing in a world that had gone liquid, made him hesitate. He filled his tank slowly, watching her from the corner of his eye. She didn't move, didn't look up, just sat there with her small hands gripping that leather like a lifeline. Against his better judgment, against every instinct honed by 15 years in the club, Jake found himself walking toward her after he'd paid. "That's a nice jacket," he said, his voice coming out rougher than he'd intended. Years of wind and cold and shouting over engine noise had left their mark. The girl looked up at him, and he saw her eyes were red-rimmed but dry. She cried herself out, he figured. Been there himself. "It was my daddy's," she said quietly. Her voice had that particular flatness that comes after grief has wrung everything else out. Jake's jaw tightened. He should walk away, get back on his bike, and ride until this moment was just another mile marker in his rearview mirror. He heard himself ask. 3 weeks ago, she said, and her fingers tightened on the jacket. Truck ran a red light. They said he didn't feel nothing. The words hit him like a fist. Jake knew that particular lie, the one they tell families to make it easier. He didn't feel anything. Like that made death somehow softer. "I'm sorry, kid." The words felt inadequate, weightless. She nodded, accepting his condolence with the solemnity of someone who'd heard variations of it 100 times already. "I was going through his things," she continued, unprompted, as if she'd been waiting for someone to talk to. "Mom said I could keep the jacket. He always wore it. Said it made him feel free, even when he was just driving to work." Jake crouched down, his knees protesting. At 43, the road had taken its toll. That what he rode? A bike? "No, sir." She shook her head. "Just a truck. But he always wanted a motorcycle." "Harley," he said. Used to talk about it all the time. Said someday, when things were different, he'd get one and just ride. Someday. Jake had heard that word from a dozen men who'd never lived to see it arrive. "I found something," the girl said suddenly, and her eyes locked onto his with an intensity that caught him off guard. "Inside the jacket, in the inner pocket, there's like a secret one, hidden behind the regular pocket." Jake's instinct screamed at him to stand up, to walk away, to kick his Harley to life and leave this scene in his dust. But something in her expression held him there, crouched on dirty concrete that was still warm from the day's heat. She reached into the jacket, her small hand disappearing into the lining. When it emerged, she held an envelope. The paper was yellowed, the edges soft with age. No address, just a name written in careful handwriting across the front. Jacob Michael Sullivan. The world tilted. Jake stared at his name. His full name, the one only his mother and the DMV knew, written in handwriting he hadn't seen in 23 years. "That's you, isn't it?" the girl asked. "That's your name. It says it on your license." She pointed to his wallet, which he'd left sitting on his bike seat. The edge of his license was visible through the clear window of the leather. His throat had gone dry. Where? He had to stop, swallow, start again. "Where did your father get this jacket?" "I don't know. He's had it forever. Since before I was born, I think." She held out the envelope. It was sealed. I didn't open it, but it has your name on it, so I thought, maybe... She trailed off, uncertainty creeping into her voice for the first time. Jake took the envelope with hands that had steadied wild bikes at 80 miles per hour, but now trembled like leaves. The paper felt fragile, like it might disintegrate at his touch. The seal on the back was still intact, dark red wax, old and cracked but unbroken. "How did you?" He couldn't finish the question. "How did you know I'd show up here? How did you know I'd stop?" "I didn't," she said simply. "But Daddy always said, if you find something that belongs to someone, you're supposed to give it back. And I saw your bike, and I saw your vest, and I thought, maybe God sent you." She said it without embarrassment, with the kind of faith only children could still muster. Jake's thumb traced the letters of his name. Behind him, a semi-truck roared past on the highway, creating a gust that stirred the dust and made the girl's ponytail dance. The sun was lower now, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. He shouldn't open it. Whatever was inside this envelope had been sealed away for a reason, hidden in a dead man's jacket like a secret meant to stay buried. But his fingers were already sliding under the flap, breaking the wax seal that crumbled like dried blood. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice. The same handwriting, but more hurried this time, less careful. The ink had faded in places, but the words were still legible. Jake began to read, and with each line, each word, each terrible revelation, the foundations of everything he believed about his life began to crack. "Jake, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and somehow this letter found you like I always hoped it would. I don't have much time. They're waiting outside, and I know how this ends. But you need to know the truth before I go. That night 23 years ago, the night Tommy died in that warehouse fire, it wasn't an accident, and it wasn't your fault." Jake's vision blurred. His hands began to shake harder. "I set that fire, brother. Me. I was the one who betrayed the club, who sold us out to the Diablos. Tommy found out. He was going to tell the president, going to have me voted out. I couldn't let that happen, so I made sure he'd never talk." The paper crinkled in Jake's tightening grip. "You walked in right as the flames started. You tried to save him. I watched you from across the street, watched you nearly die trying to pull him out. And then I watched you take the blame. Watched you get kicked out of the club for leaving a brother behind. Watched you carry that guilt for something I did. I left the club that night. Changed my name. Started over. Got married. Had a daughter. Tried to be the man I should have been. But every day, I carried the weight of what I'd done. To Tommy, to you, to the brotherhood. I kept this jacket as penance. Wore it every day to remember what I'd stolen from you. Your reputation, your brothers, your future. And I kept this letter sealed inside it, hoping that somehow, someday, fate would put it in your hands. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But you deserve the truth. You were never a coward. You were never a traitor. You were the only one brave enough to run into the flames. Tell my daughter I try to be better. Tell her the jacket was meant to find you." Michael smoked Garrett. The letter slipped from Jake's fingers and fell to the concrete. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. 23 years. 23 years of carrying the shame of that night, of believing he'd failed his brother, of living with the disgrace of being voted out of the only family he'd ever known. And it had all been a lie. The girl was saying something, but he couldn't hear her over the roaring in his ears. His legs gave out, and he dropped to his knees on the gravel, gasping for air that wouldn't come. Not pain, not physical pain. This was something worse, the unbearable weight of stolen years suddenly lifting leaving him hollow and shattered and somehow, impossibly free. The girl's small hand touched his shoulder, tentative and warm. "Mister, are you okay?" Jake couldn't answer. Couldn't form words past the knot in his throat. Tears he hadn't cried in 2 decades burned behind his eyes, blurring the dusty parking lot into abstract watercolors of tan and gray. His breath came in ragged gasps, each one feeling like the first breath after drowning. 23 years. He'd been 19 when it happened. A prospect trying to earn his patch, eager to prove himself worthy of the Iron Phantoms. Tommy had been his sponsor, his mentor, the older brother he'd never had. And when that warehouse went up in flames, old accelerants stored improperly by a defunct manufacturing company, Jake had run inside without thinking. He could still remember the heat, the smoke filling his lungs like liquid fire. Tommy's screams, the way the support beams had started cracking overhead. He'd grabbed Tommy's arm, tried to drag him toward the door, but a ceiling joist had collapsed between them. He'd been blown backward by the impact, barely making it out before the whole structure came down. Tommy had died in there. And Jake, covered in soot and ash, his eyebrows singed off, his hands blistered, had faced the club president and the other members with the weight of failure crushing his chest. "You left a brother behind," the president had said. "You came out alone." It didn't matter that he'd tried. Didn't matter that he'd nearly died himself. The code was absolute. You never, ever left a brother behind. Not for anything. Not even to save your own life. They'd stripped his prospect patch that night. Told him he wasn't Iron Phantom material. Told him to leave town and never come back. He'd done exactly that, riding away from Colorado on a used Sportster with nothing but shame as a companion. And all along, Smoke had known, had watched it happen, had let Jake carry the blame for his murder. "My daddy was a bad man, wasn't he?" The girl's voice cut through the noise in his head. Jake looked up at her through tear-blurred vision and saw her holding the letter, her young face struggling to process words that were probably too adult for her to fully understand. "No," Jake said hoarsely. He cleared his throat and tried again. "No, sweetheart. Your daddy was a man who made a terrible mistake, but he spent the rest of his life trying to be better. He wrote about me," she said, her finger pointing to the line in the letter. "He said to tell me the jacket was meant to find you." "What does that mean?" Jake pushed himself up from his knees, his joints protesting. He sat down heavily on the concrete step beside her, no longer caring about the dirt or the heat still radiating from the ground. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange that seemed too beautiful for a moment like this. "It means," he said slowly, "that your father knew he'd done something wrong, and he wanted to make it right, even if he couldn't do it while he was alive." "Did he hurt you?" The question was so direct, so achingly innocent, that Jake had to close his eyes for a moment. "Yeah," he admitted. "He did. But not the way you're thinking. He didn't hit me or anything like that. He let me believe something about myself that wasn't true." She considered this with the seriousness of someone much older than her years. "Mom says lies hurt worse than anything else." "Your mom is right." They sat in silence for a moment. The gas station's fluorescent lights flickered on with a buzzing hum, casting harsh shadows across the parking lot. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. "Can I tell you something?" the girl asked. "Sure, kid. I was so mad at him. At Daddy." Her voice cracked. "Before he died, we had a fight. I told him I hated him because he wouldn't let me go to a sleepover at my friend's house. And those are the last words I said to him before the accident. I hate you. I didn't mean it, but I can't take it back now." And there it was, the real reason she'd been sitting here with that jacket waiting, not just to deliver a letter, to confess her own burden to someone who might understand. Jake felt something shift in his chest. The rage that had been building since he'd read Smoke's words, 23 years of rage, suddenly found a new shape, because sitting next to him was a little girl carrying guilt that would poison her the same way his guilt had poisoned him. Unless someone stopped it right now. "Listen to me," Jake said, turning to face her fully. He waited until she met his eyes. "What you said to your dad, he knew you didn't mean it. Parents, they understand that kids get mad and say things. My mom, before she died, the last thing I said to her was that I'd see her next month. But I didn't. I got busy, and she passed before I made it back. For years, I carried that. Thought I'd failed her. What changed? The girl whispered. I realized that love isn't measured by the last words we say. It's measured by all the words, all the moments, all the times we showed up. Your dad knew you loved him, just like you need to know something about him. She waited, holding her breath. The man who wrote this letter, your father, he might have done something terrible when he was young, but he spent every day after that trying to be better. That's what the jacket means. He wore his shame, his regret, every single day. And he raised you, loved you, became someone worth remembering. That's the man you should hold on to. But the letter says he made a mistake that cost someone's life and cost me my future. Both of those things are true. But it also says he tried to make amends the only way he knew how. By being a good father. By making sure the truth found me eventually. That takes courage too. The girl looked down at the jacket in her lap. Will you hate him? For what he did? Jake took a long breath, considering the question seriously. Would he hate Smoke? Part of him wanted to. Part of him wanted to rage at a dead man who'd stolen 23 years and couldn't even be here to face the consequences. But another part, the part that had just watched a little girl struggle with her own guilt, understood something he hadn't before. No, he said finally. I'm angry. I probably will be for a long time. But hate? No, because hating him won't give me those years back. And it won't help you remember your father as anything but a monster. He wasn't a monster. He was a man who made a terrible choice and spent the rest of his life trying to atone for it. She started crying then, really crying, not the silent tears from before, but the great heaving sobs of a child who'd been holding everything in for too long. Without thinking, Jake put his arm around her shoulders and let her cry against his leather vest, not caring that she was getting tears and snot on the patches that represented everything he'd lost. Maybe that was fitting. Maybe this was how those years finally got put to rest, not in rage or revenge, but in comforting a little girl who needed to know her father wasn't a villain. Where her sobs finally subsided into hiccups, she pulled back and wiped her face with her sleeve. What will you do now? She asked. Jake looked at his Harley, chrome gleaming in the parking lot lights. Then he looked at the letter on the ground, Smoke's confession written in fading ink. I'm going to go home, he said. Back to Colorado, back to my old club, and I'm going to tell them the truth. Will they believe you? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not, but I'm going to try. He stood up, picked up the letter, and folded it carefully before tucking it into his inner vest pocket, right over his heart. And you know what else? What? I'm going to remember that your father, whatever else he did wrong, did one thing absolutely right. He loved his daughter enough to make sure she could let go of guilt that wasn't hers to carry. The girl stood up too, clutching the jacket. Do you want it? The jacket. Jake looked at it. Worn leather, faded but still solid. A dead man's attempt at penance. No, sweetheart. That's yours. It was his way of carrying his burden. But you don't need to carry it anymore. Neither of us do. She nodded, understanding in a way that seemed older than her years. A car pulled into the gas station, an older sedan that had seen better days. A woman got out, worry etched on her face. Sarah, I've been looking everywhere for you. That's my mom, the girl, Sarah said. She started toward the car, then turned back. Thank you, Mr. Jake. Thank you, he replied, and meant it. He watched them drive away, taillights disappearing into the gathering dark. Then he swung his leg over his Harley, feeling the familiar weight of the machine beneath him. The engine roared to life, that beautiful growl that had been his only constant companion for 23 years. As he pulled out onto the highway, heading east toward Colorado and toward a reckoning 23 years overdue, Jake Reaper Sullivan felt something he hadn't felt since he was 19 years old. Hope. The road stretched out before him, dark and endless and full of possibility. And for the first time in 2 decades, he wasn't running away from his past. He was riding toward his future.